The review has been undertaken by a team based at the University of Cambridge Faculty of Education, supported by 66 research consultants from in 20 other universities, and a 20-strong advisory committee drawn from inside and outside education and chaired by Dame Gillian Pugh, to whom again I'm hugely indebted. Together, the number of these people directly involved in making the review happen and keeping it on the road comes to about 100. I mention this not just to acknowledge their contribution, but also to rebut suggestions that our final report is merely the work of a small bunch of out-of-touch academics, or even just one out-of-touch academic. Its scope is broad, its evidence is extensive, its authorship is diverse, its participants are many, and of critical importance in the context of the way the government has personalised its attacks on the report. Its conclusions and recommendations have been collectively determined, collectively agreed by the 14 authors and the 20 members of the advisory committee. And those recommendations and conclusions, I have to say, deal with much, much more than the one issue on which everyone has fixated so far, the school starting age. Getting it wrong, too. Perhaps the most reassuring finding of the review is this: England's primary schools remain under intense pressure after 2 decades of continuous change and reform and a great deal of public scrutiny, but they're in good heart and in general are doing a good job. Since 1997, investment in primary education has risen dramatically. Many initiatives have had a positive impact, and government deserves credit for this, and is given credit for it. So there are some things which government cannot say are out of date about the report. Highly valued by children and parents, primary schools provide stability and positive values in a world of change and uncertainty. Contrary to myth, and again this is important in view of the kind of things that have been said in recent days, schools are not in danger of subversion by 1970s ideologues. They do not neglect the 3 R's, they never have done. Of course, there's room for improvement, some of it radical, and we have much to say about this. But in a large and complex system of primary education, how could it be otherwise? However, the condition of the system as a whole is sound. Now, cutting across our evidence on specifics are 3 broad concerns which were voiced by many of the review's witnesses: the condition of childhood today, the state of society and the world in which children are growing up, and the focus and impact of government policy. The book has changed shape somewhat dramatically. I've only just seen that on the screen. On the first of these, the report questions the conventional wisdom that childhood is in crisis. You remember this was very much in the wake of the UNICEF report. Noting that children were the review's most upbeat witnesses and emphasising the research evidence on just how much young children know, understand and can do, given teaching that recognises their capability, heeds their voices, stimulates their interests and challenges their thinking. The real childhood crisis that we draw attention to concerns the fate of the substantial minority of children whose lives are blighted by poverty, disadvantage, risk and discrimination, and here governments are absolutely right to intervene. On the world in which today's children are growing up, the review found adults and children anxious about risk, change, loss of community, global warming and much else. And let it not be forgotten that today's primary pupils will be only in their 40s in 2050, when the world reaches what many predict as the tipping point for climate change. But we also found that fear turns to hope when education helps them to confront and address such challenges. And that's why the empowerment of both children and teachers and the reinvigoration of communities are such important themes of the report. In this light, it was perhaps unwise of Howard Davis of LSE to mock the report's concern with empowerment, as he did on Any Questions last Friday. For if education is not about giving people the capacity to take control of their lives and make a difference, what on earth is it about? While the government's childhood agenda is applauded, its standards agenda is viewed less favourably. Not out of opposition to standards, nor out of opposition to accountability, but because of the educational damage which the apparatus of targets, testing, performance tables, national strategies and inspection is perceived to have caused for questionable returns. But overriding this concern about specific policies is a more pervasive concern about recent trends in the policy process itself, about which the word centralisation tells only part of the story. More on this in a moment. Let me, in the limited time available, pick out a few specific recommendations. Firstly, on aims. People rarely pause to ask what primary education is for. If they do, they tend to start with the 3 R's and then stop. The report confirms the centrality of literacy and numeracy, though it takes a much broader view of what literacy entails, and it argues strongly for oracy to be given the central place in curriculum, teaching and learning that it has in many continental European countries. Further, the report argues that although the education system as a whole would benefit from having a clearer overall view of what it is for and where it is heading, the needs of children at different stages and the imperatives of their education at those stages are also in certain ways quite distinct. So, arising from the review's evidence and consultations, we propose a framework of 12 new aims for primary education, which should shape curriculum, pedagogy, and the wider life of the school rather than be tacked on as an afterthought. There isn't time to go into them in detail. The report provides that detail. Now, last Friday, to move on to a second issue, it was widely reported that we were recommending that children shouldn't attend school until age 6. This, you at least know, is incorrect. But the misreading has now snowballed. What our report actually recommends is that the strengthening and upward extension of the curriculum embodied in the government's early years foundation stage, the EYFS, the simplification of the EYFS Key Stage 1 and 2 relationship by reducing it to 2 stages, foundation and primary, and then a debate about whether the actual starting age should be raised in line with international practice. But the crucial issue is getting the provision, the curriculum, right. On the curriculum, the report questions the Rose Review's premise that the main curriculum challenge is, in his words, how to help primary class teachers solve the quartz into pint pots problem of fitting 13 subjects plus RE into the limited time available. Curriculum manageability is certainly a problem at the primary stage, though significantly not for all schools. Some can manage it. But manageability is as much about expertise and staffing as the curriculum itself. And the government's Rose Review appears to treat the generalist class teacher system, which after all is a legacy of the Victorian urge to deliver a narrow curriculum to the urban masses as cheaply as possible, as the inevitable and natural way to organise primary schools in the 21st century, despite the fact that the curriculum has expanded and the task of the teacher is much more diverse and complex now than it was then. Curriculum manageability is also about the way the government's standards agenda of national strategies and SATs is seen by so many teachers to have distorted precisely what it aims to improve and measure. So we want the government not to presume that with the Rose Review the curriculum is, as they say, sorted. After all, you can move from the current 13 subjects to Rose's 6 areas of learning, which have a lot to commend them, incidentally, which at first sight is an appealing simplification. But if you've not tackled the underlying problems, then little will change, including the currently very uneven quality of curriculum provision beyond literacy and numeracy. So we want government and the opposition and the profession and parents to give proper consideration to the review's more comprehensive analysis of the problems to be fixed and to its alternative proposals for a national framework of 8 domains of knowledge, skill and inquiry, combined with a locally responsive community curriculum, all driven by the proposed 12 aims. Since last Friday, some have claimed that we propose to scrap SATs, that's the phrase that was commonly used, and leave nothing in their place, and that schools should no longer be accountable. In fact, the report is adamant that children must be assessed summatively at the end of the primary phase, and that they must also be assessed formatively throughout their primary schooling, and that schools should be accountable. No argument. The issue, the report says, is not whether children should be assessed or schools should be accountable, but how. And we propose an approach to end of primary summative assessment which reflects our insistence on children's entitlement to a broad curriculum and doesn't treat literacy or numeracy as proxies for the whole curriculum, and doesn't treat SATs as the only valid or rigorous form of assessment available, though tests of some kind are not ruled out in our proposals as part of a more rounded approach to assessment. We call for greater use of teacher assessment within this process, supported by external moderation. So, properly viewed, what is proposed in the report could be seen in some ways as more rigorous than what we have now. We don't provide a blueprint. That's for the best assessment brains in the country to work on, and it'll take time, but we do set out the broad principles. And like Barry Sheerman's committee, we also argue for the separation of the functions that at present SATs have to combine: assessment of children, evaluation of schools, and monitoring of the system as a whole. On standards, next, the report contains a careful analysis of the vital matter of educational standards. It finds the current definition of standards as test performance in literacy and numeracy, and in those alone, narrow and misleading. Subject to that considerable limitation, it then goes on to look at the national and the international evidence, identifying the claims about standards, positive and negative, which can be sustained, drawing attention to methodological problems with the current approach, and assessing the validity of a whole range of claims by which the political rhetoric of standards tends to be flavoured. For example, testing of itself drives up standards. Until 1997, English primary education was at a low state and primary teachers were professionally uninformed. I'm quoting. The way to raise standards in the basics is to concentrate only on the basics, and so on. The report debunks many of these. It also argues that standards and entitlement should be more precisely aligned, that children are entitled to the highest possible standards of teaching across the whole curriculum, regardless of how much or how little time a subject is allocated. And it repeats the recurrent finding of HMI, Ofsted, and at least one government white paper from an earlier government, that standards in the basics and breadth and quality in the rest of the curriculum are intimately related. Incidentally, the schools minister said last Friday that the government's new school report cards would solve this problem. They won't. For while they include welcome attention to the pupil's well-being and personal and social development, the measure of pupil attainment at age 11 remains as now: test performance in literacy and numeracy. It is, of course, teaching, not testing, that drives up standards, and pedagogy is a major theme of the review. The report finds that the highly prescriptive national strategy, National Literacy, Numeracy and Primary Strategies, introduced from 1998 onwards, which tell teachers not just what to teach but how, combined with testing and the focus of inspection, initial teacher training, continuing professional development, and local authority school improvement, all of which, by and large, seek to secure compliance with the strategies, add up to what one of our commissioned research surveys called, and the press picked it up, a state theory of learning. We want that to end. And to quote an earlier Secretary of State from a previous administration, we want the principle that questions about how to teach are not for government to determine to be reinstated. We want teaching to be grounded in repertoire, evidence, and principle rather than recipe. We want to strengthen what, according to the international research evidence, separates the best teachers from the rest: their depth of knowledge of and their engagement with what is to be taught, the quality and cognitive power of the classroom interaction they orchestrate, and their skill in assessing and providing feedback on pupils' learning, all day, every day, not just in Year 6. In order to ensure that every school has access to the expertise which a modern primary education requires and can deliver both our broader account of educational entitlement and its more rigorous concept of standards, the report calls for a full review of primary school staffing, which assesses the match between the tasks of primary schools and the available expertise, roles, and numbers of teachers and support staff. It anticipates the extension of teaching roles to include specialists and semi-specialists as well as generalist class teachers, especially for older children. But it wants schools to be staffed with sufficient flexibility so that they can make their own decisions on how such specialists should be deployed. In common with other studies, the review finds England's system of primary education over-centralised, over-controlled, and subject to excessive micromanagement by government and the national agencies. The review's evidence was collected between 2006 and 2009, but that evidence yields few signs that the decentralisation promised in 2001 for the second stage of the government's public service reform has got as far as the primary education sector. Mindful of this, the report is sceptical about the renewed claim of decentralisation in the due 2009 white paper. The report argues for the tide of centralisation to be reversed, especially in the vital domain of teaching, and for the roles and relationships of national government, the non-departmental public bodies, local authorities and schools to be reconfigured, leading to a greatly strengthened role in educational decision-making for schools, local authorities and local communities. This will simultaneously advance the causes of reprofessionalising teachers and engaging communities. The disparity in funding between primary and secondary schools has been criticised by reports going back as far as Haddow in 1931 and probably further. If, following the proposed staffing review, primary schools are to have the resources they need in terms of both expertise and numbers, then there are considerable funding implications. The end of the national teaching strategies and the proposed slimming down of national infrastructure will allow resources to be redirected to local authorities and schools, but probably not to the extent required. And in the present economic climate, this is going to be problematic, of course. But ultimately, it must surely be within the ability of one of the world's richest nations to ensure that at this vital stage of children's lives, the educational task of schools is matched by appropriate professional resources. There are many other recommendations: a 2-year PGCE, a review of special needs provision which goes beyond the current LAM review, revision of the TDA professional standards, modifications to Ofsted inspection, protection of small schools, reinstatement and expansion of those school libraries which have been cut back in mistaken belief that screens have replaced books, partnership between schools, many more. I can't summarise them here. The only authentic account of what the review concludes and proposes is that provided by the report itself. And in view of what has happened since last Friday, I urge you not to be content with the digests and summaries which are currently doing the rounds. The conclusions and recommendations are naturally of particular interest, but they are not all that matters about this report. For us, and we hope for you, the evidence, the analysis and argument in which the conclusions are grounded are just as important. For this report is not just for this week or this month, to be reacted to on an instant accept-reject basis. Still less is it for pre-election posturing and point scoring. We hope, and we immodestly believe, that the report offers food for thinking and discussion for some years to come, and a vision of primary education which will not be achieved overnight. In that sense, for ministers to claim, as they have, that the report is out of date because the review started 3 years ago is to miss the point, and pretty spectacularly. Not only is their assertion incorrect, but the very fact that the review started 3 years ago and was not a quick fix inquiry of the kind that governments these days tend to prefer is testament to its depth and longer-term value. In any case, the report is not just for the makers and agents of policy, but for all those who invest in this vital phase of education, especially children, parents and teachers. And let it be understood too, that the report above all seeks to encourage a new way of thinking and talking about primary education, a way which abandons the polarization, sloganizing, myth-making, misrepresentation and name-calling which have bedeviled the primary education scene since the 1960s and which have been so evident in recent days. A way which is alive to nuance and the problematic, which respects evidence but is also prepared to test it, which learns from history instead of saying, that was yesterday, now it's time to draw a line and move on. And finally, a way of thinking and talking which embraces alternative viewpoints and gladly engages with new ideas, and thus gives news readers a welcome break from that now routine and predictable phrase, which they use, it seems to me, almost every week: the government has dismissed the findings. Thank you.
I reflected this year that I started teaching in the wake of the Plowden report, and celebrated 4 decades of working in primary schools. And thank you, I can see from your face you find that an incredible fact. And in the pamphlet that goes with this, there's a piece in here that talks about the breadth of life. Well, Robin, I thought it was a breath of life, because actually what you had to say about primary education, I think, was certainly a shot in the arm to my colleagues, because we have suffered decades, actually, of being told that we're not doing very well. So to hear that actually primary education is in good health, though under, and I would agree, under great duress, was very welcome. A shot in the arm always better than being shot in the back. I've got 6 points to make, so that's a minute each. So first of all...
You've used up a minute already. So.
Oh, right. Well, I'll speak more quickly. First of all, the full and open debate. I think it's absolutely right that we should have a full and open debate about a report which is huge in size and breadth. And simply to dismiss the report in a few words, I think it does not do anybody any justice. And I think that, indeed, we do need to broaden that debate out and make sure that we look at all the aspects. And some of the ones, for instance, age, not stage, or stage, not age, that we explore all of those aspects. My 6-year-old grandchild is an avid reader, and I wouldn't want any mistakes about holding her back from that love of reading that she's developed already by being age-dependent rather than stage. We also need to have a full and open debate about what it is we're doing with the curriculum, and simply tinkering with the curriculum, I think, will not do. If we are living in an age, as we surely are, and good to see Stephen here this evening, of technological advance, then I think we have to make sure that we have a curriculum for children and young people that reflects that. I managed to get in the headlines the other day of saying head teachers union leader wants to deregulate the use of mobile phones in the classroom. This was actually on the back of a comment I made where a child, a young person actually in a classroom, took his mobile phone out and took a photograph of his homework and then had his phone confiscated. But I thought, what a good thing to do, actually, because a lot better than writing it all out. So we do need to make sure that children have those opportunities. And technological advance is with us. And indeed, children have technology as part of their DNA in a way that we tend not to. We also need to have a curriculum that deals with environmental change. One of the most encouraging things I heard about primary schools was that some of them anyway, are centres of environmental radicalism. Now, I think all primary schools need to be centres of environmental radicalism. As Robin said, these children who are primary children in school now will be 40 when the oil runs out. And unless we send those young people, those children out with ideas about saving the planet and sustainability and all of those things, and that's the best way of doing it, then I think we are truly stuck. And also we need to make sure that we send out a generation of children who value learning and are very good at knowledge and skills and understanding, and not simply good at passing tests. You will know, and indeed they are, you will know that the NAHT and my colleagues in the NUT, and good to see John Bangs here, I have a little campaign going, the Assessment Reform Campaign, and we are determined that next year, and this year, Year 6 will have the best possible education, unhampered by having to rehearse tests, and we are determined that that will happen. I think what was in the report of saying that it's teaching and not testing that raising standards is absolutely right. We do agree that it's not about whether children should be assessed, but how, and we need to make sure that that assessment actually is fit for learning, because you can put up whatever curriculum you like. If you don't change the way it's assessed, you will end up with the same curriculum. And that's the heart of why we're doing what we're doing. And indeed, change happens to children's education in the classroom, and it is the quality of teaching that counts, and there are lots of complex relationships that affect that quality of teaching. And I remember full well, 40 years ago, going into my first classroom, having a class list of 46 children, and an empty space between 9 o'clock on Monday morning and 4 o'clock on Friday evening, which was a terrifying space. And compare that with now, when actually many teachers, and we would have to detrain them, many teachers are told not only what to teach, but also how to teach it. So I think there is a huge debate to be had on the back of this, and I want to see that debate move forward. I do want, despite the fact of negative comments, Robin, from the politicians, or some of them anyway, Barry, I do want to see that debate move forward. And I also think that, of course, it's not just what happens in the classroom and those pedagogical skills. It is that early intervention, which is why we're very keen to see how schools can intervene in that. And I think teachers and those who work with them are extremely good at identifying when children are in trouble. What they lack is the wherewithal to do something about it, and making sure we work with directors of children's services to ensure that happens is essential. So look, I think we've got, I'll wind up now, we've got a polarised debate here, and the NUT and the NHT are not against testing. We're against the way in which testing is done today in Year 6 and the purposes to which that testing is put. And I think that if the politicians are not going to listen to us, then it is up to us, the learning community, to take hold of this agenda and make sure that it is a vehicle for our children in our schools, because that is the way that we'll have children leaving school, and particularly the primary phase, having valued their education. Thank you.
But I'm particularly interested in three aspects, three key characteristics, as I see it, of the Cambridge Primary Review. First, it's its very wide scope, based on a careful analysis of all the themes that interconnect in the experience of primary-aged children, not limited to one aspect of those. It recognises that these interact, and when you consider one, it has implications for others. Second, it's thoroughly grounded in research and not just opinion, although it does respect the perspectives of stakeholders through its consultation processes. And the third characteristic is it makes recommendations, and this is a quote, not to secure their wholesale adoption, but to encourage the same kind of discussion that the exercise has forced on us. So it's not a one-off thing, it's a part of a process that will continue. So I want to look at the implications of these for first research and then teacher education, if you like. The review makes clear, first of all, that education is a moral enterprise, not just an instrumental one. It's about things that are worthwhile and not just things that are useful. It requires continuing dialogue about evidence, therefore, and values. A wide definition of what counts as research, then, is needed, and it includes scholarship as well as social scientific work. It requires philosophical deliberation, historical perspective, political analysis, and so forth. Although in all these areas, there are criteria of quality, and what counts as quality, and quality is paramount. As in other fields, research is a foundation of innovation in education, and it needs, for this reason, to scan the broad horizon and not be concerned only with what works to achieve low-level outcomes, or to provide after-the-fact generalized justification for policy already decided. And this has implications for both researchers and policymakers. First, researchers. Researchers should be given and accept a significant role in public debate. Some may need to work harder, admittedly, to make their work accessible to non-researchers, and if you like, to translate their findings into practical ideas that can be implemented and refined in authentic settings. In turn, this aspect of their work needs to be properly supported and recognized within, for instance, the research assessment exercises that determine the research funding allocated to university departments. Secondly, policymakers. Policymakers need to value and promote truly independent research. Of course, they should identify research priorities in the public interest, but they should not micromanage the research that is carried out. And they should be cautious, and this reflects what's already been said, about making judgments of the quality of research when it does not fit their preconceptions. In relation to the report, I am concerned about politicians, as Robin is, trying to rubbish the research as outdated. Good research is cumulative. It pushes knowledge forward by building on, critiquing, and testing what has gone before. It is not invalidated by new, untested policy proposals. The importance of research independence, integrity, and quality needs, therefore, to be reasserted. Much research in education is currently funded directly by the Department for Children, Schools and Families as evaluations of its initiatives. I see no reason, and this is a personal view, why the majority of research in education can't be managed by bodies that are genuinely at arm's length from government. Within the universities that I've worked in and been associated with, the best research is often perceived to be supported by either the research councils or by charitable foundations such as Esmee, Fairbairn, Nuffield and Rowntree. The next point, looking at teacher training and professional development. Key messages from the report are that no one size fits all, and training and professional development needs to be progressive, differentiated and continuous. For example, the recommendation that should be a new foundation stage from 0 to 6 and a new primary stage from 6 to 11 implies that teachers and others who choose to work in, say, the foundation stage will need to be properly trained for it. The facilitation and orchestration of learning through play will demand a great deal of the knowledge and the skill, both together, of the adults in this setting. Similarly, if a degree of subject specialism is introduced, teachers' domain knowledge will need to be strengthened. Greater responsibility for ongoing and properly moderated assessment by teachers for both formative and summative purposes will also demand professional expertise. Clearly, all primary teachers can't do everything, and the report recommendation that the current generalist initial teacher training be revised in favour of more specialism, or a degree of it, is wise. However, teacher education, in my view, should not be associated exclusively with attendance in courses, initial teacher training and inset. Much of it occurs as adult learning in the workplace. As the report points out, teachers move from being novice to expert over time through engaging with the day-to-day challenges they face in the context in which they work. Like other professionals, the more novice benefit from opportunities to learn from those who are more expert and knowledgeable. This too indicates the need for different forms of provision as teachers gain confidence and skill. It is not sufficient to give teachers a single dose of training at the beginning of their career and expect this to be enough. CPD that builds on initial training in relation to changing needs and roles must be an expectation of and by every teacher.
Really is very much to welcome here from the point of view of the local authority and of a director of children's services, which, as you know, is a newish development with a wide range of responsibilities for the welfare and well-being of children in conjunction with lead members of authorities, children's trusts and local safeguarding children's boards. And the great thing at the outset is that the review, quote, strongly supports the aims and implementation of Every Child Matters and genuinely joined up services and, quote, supports the policy of developing primary schools as community hubs, providers of extended services and effective multi-agency working. In other words, there is in here a full and proper appreciation that unless all 5 of the outcomes, physical and mental health, safety, educational achievement, making a positive contribution and preparing for adult and working life, unless all 5 are pursued simultaneously and vigorously and continuously, none of them will be achieved. None of the progress we're looking for with families will be made. The gaps, the narrowing gap agenda will be weakened and so on. This issue of integrated working is possibly and there's a lot of contrast and comparison with Plowden quite naturally in the report. Over the last 40 years, I would judge that it's one of the areas that least progress has been made on since Plowden, and there are, as you will see in the report, a number of quotations direct from Plowden which sound extraordinarily and depressingly contemporary. For example, cooperation, this is Plowden, cooperation between family doctors, schools and public health services and hospitals should be closer. The principal need is for a grouping of existing organisations within a comprehensive plan of action. That wasn't written last week, it was written 40 years ago. But currently, the idea of children's services is vulnerable and it is fragile, and that perhaps isn't quite sufficiently identified in the report. Of course, there's good constructive criticism. Mick Brookes, for example, is quoted arguing for the return of a second-tier officer for education as statutory within local authorities. The loss of education from the statutory lexicon is not good. It must be at the heart. After all, health and safety are not pursued for their own sake. Well, health is if you're a hypochondriac, but generally speaking, health and safety aren't pursued for their own sake, but in order to provide the conditions for educational and other forms of attainment. Equally, once those achievements are there, they can be applied to improving health and safety and so on. There is, though, a negative dimension to this, as you know, currently around Haringey, around other authorities. Also, though, within authorities from other colleagues, there are arguments going on for the restoration of social services departments, all through social services departments. The point and purpose of children's trusts is still being examined, and the effectiveness of local safeguarding children boards is still underway. In the light of this position, then, it is very helpful indeed to have the consistent endorsement of soundings and surveys and submissions in the report for the idea and the pressure for stability to embed and secure this set of new and important arrangements. There's lots around at the moment on whether it's working or whether it can be done, or whether or not Director of Children's Services role is the job from hell, and so on. But this is the first time I have seen a systematic indication of whether or not it should be done. And it's very encouraging from the surveys, comprehensive surveys in the report, that there's a widespread view that it should be done. Secondly, the role of the Director of Children's Services is local, or it is nothing. And so a very important development here is the proposal for a local dimension to the curriculum. Very welcome. A proposal in here that from now, or as soon as possible, 70% of the curriculum is nationally determined, but 30% is locally determined within the community, responding to the particular circumstances, needs and concerns and ideas of the local community. The proposal in here for a community curriculum partnership is, to my mind, extremely important and innovative, and hasn't been mentioned, as far as I know, anywhere in any of the discussions around this. The capacity to innovate is not restricted to national government. Schools and local authorities and communities, the communities they serve, have massive potential for innovation. Local innovations should be allowed to flourish. They shouldn't be flattened. In Barking and Dagenham, we've had, over the last 10 to 15 years, a systematic programme of investigation of continental pedagogy, continental curricula, taking 250 to 300 teachers in total over there. We have developed curricula on that basis, which are very applicable to the folk of the community. And all we found from the national strategies is stifling, or an attempt to stifle, local initiative in favour of the superimposition of national views and national developments. Are you looking at me because I'm running out of time? Sort of. I'm very sorry. And class teachers will also welcome that. And just one final area I would like to mention, and it will just take me 30 seconds. It picks up on what Robin said at the beginning, the exciting and central place of oracy in this report. Hugely impressive. Throughout the whole of the report, the children's voice, listening to, responding to, and empowering children and young people through language, especially spoken language, the promotion of dialogue and conversation and debate, both between teachers and between pupils and pupils, and indeed, with my Every Child Matters hat on, the encounters between children and health workers or children and social services and so on, where their capacity to speak and engage is crucial. This is something which, again, since Plowden, there's been precious little development. It's not been there. There's been this focus all the way through on reading and writing as literacy, and the spoken language has been missing. Now this report seeks to give it equal standing, and as far as I'm concerned, that addresses brilliantly a second major area of failure to develop over the past 40 years. Thank you very much.
First of all, a little bit about childhood and children in general from the report. As Robin has suggested, contrary to popular belief, the majority of children are in very good heart, upbeat about the present and optimistic about the future, and are indeed very happy with their schools. Many things are improving for children: health, life expectancy, income, housing, access to information, global awareness, and hugely increased educational opportunity. But despite concerns, commercialism, bullying, drugs, climate change, and so on, the feared or perceived risks are greater than the actual risks. Parents are far more worried than children. The children who we met as we travelled the country and who wrote to us, those who were able to be engaged in their schools in talking about things that worried them, whether it was something like family breakdown or the impact of global warming, were much better able to face up to the challenges that they were presented with. Empowering children was the key. So most children are doing well, but strikingly we are an increasingly divided and unequal society with a huge tale of underachievement. The report points to the compelling evidence of the links between poverty and social class and all aspects of children's lives: educational attainment, health, ability to find and keep jobs. The report reminds us what a high priority it must remain for us to reduce child poverty and to narrow the gap between the children, those children who do well and those who don't. And our primary education system must benefit all children and must help to close those gaps. Secondly, children's voices, and I'm glad we've heard about children's voices. These are at the heart of the review. It was really only until quite recently that children, it is only since quite recently that children have been seen as important stakeholders in education. For many years, it was only their parents who were seemed to matter. But children are, of course, central, and their voices are heard throughout the chapters of this report. I'm delighted that the recommendations are based on the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, that children are treated as beings in the here and now, rather than just becomings, what they might be in the future, that the review takes full account of the families and the communities that children come from and the importance of children's lives outside school and the experiences that they bring into school, all too often ignored, and that children's voices are indeed central to the review. The report celebrates how much children bring to their learning, how much they know and can do, and the importance of building on this. This came through from so much of our evidence, especially from teachers. Children's sense of agency, in the jargon, is vital for both their learning and for their well-being. So there is recognition here, then, that children's participation in all aspects of their learning and school life is absolutely key. Children need to feel that they can make choices, that their contributions make a difference, that they have some control over the decisions in their lives, and that their views matter. And what sense they talk. For example, when we asked children what made a good teacher, what they came up with was actually exactly what the research showed through rather more circuitous routes. They've got to really know their stuff. They've got to be able to make learning fun. They've got to tell you things in advance so you know what the lesson's about and be able to explain things clearly so you understand. And they've got to have lots of energy and enthusiasm, straight from the horse's mouth. And thirdly, our proposals about the foundation phase. Huge interest in this, but nearly all of it ill-informed. It has been extraordinary participating in this, in the 26 or so interviews that I did on radio and television on Friday, and somewhat surreal to see myself shown on 3 different TV channels simultaneously at the same time. Politicians and some parents were reported as reflecting on our proposals as saying that children should start learning before 6. Well, for heaven's sake, children are born learning. Whatever does anybody think that they're about? Children are born learning, and but the danger is that if we put a damper on their creativity and enthusiasm and curiosity, so often by providing a curriculum that doesn't meet their needs and by giving them too many opportunities to fail and to become disengaged. We're not saying that children should stay at home until they're 6, as Robin has said. We're saying that the foundation phase, currently the early years foundation stage, though not perfect, is based on sound principles, and that the integrated and holistic approach to learning, social, emotional, physical and cognitive, better reflects what we know about how children develop and how they learn. The report draws heavily on an excellent review of research into children's development and learning by Usha Goswami and Peter Bryant, looking at child psychology, at sociology and at neuroscience. And from that evidence, and from all the written submissions and the soundings that we held, it became clear that we should propose extending the foundation stage up to the age of 6 rather than the current situation where many children start formal schooling a few weeks or months after their 4th birthday, and many struggle. Let us ensure that children can establish positive attitudes towards learning and to developing the language and study skills that are essential to later progress, and let's not put them off before they start. It was extraordinary how the World Service interview that I did, people phoned in from all over the world, still astonished that we started our children so young, and with examples of how children born here and born elsewhere made such different progress because of these different approaches. And our own evidence, research evidence from this country, supports that. So this is a report that is firmly focused on what we know from first-hand experience and from research about what is best for our young children. I'm really pleased to have been able to play a small part in bringing it to fruition, and as others have said, look forward to a real debate about what we have said over the years ahead. Thank you.